the LA Lakers and Dan Hurley seem to be pretty far down the line. And I think a lot of people's question is, how did this deal not get done? It is shocking that Dan Hurley, the head coach of UConn Basketball, flew all the way to Los Angeles for a day and a half to meet with the Lakers, to leave Los Angeles without a deal, and then ultimately to spurn the Lakers to stay at UConn Basketball is shocking by any measure. Maybe more shocking is the Lakers didn't really make him an offer that would move him off his spot. And I think that's the narrative that is being spun. Listen, I think it's true. Was it a top 6 offer? It was. The Lakers offered to make Dan Hurley one of the 6 highest paid coaches in the NBA. But when you are trolling for the biggest fish in the pond, is a top 6 salary really enough? I'm telling you, it is not enough. And I believe in my heart of hearts, this came down to a financial decision for Dan Hurley. Was it enough to leave a very cush job with a loaded roster and a very, very likely opportunity to win 3 straight national championships for UConn basketball? Was a top 6 salary enough? And my belief is it was not. I think it came down to money and leaving comfort and leaving what he knows and taking a very, very difficult job. I think one of the most difficult jobs in the NBA. So, Jake, I think this came down to money for Dan Hurley.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that, obviously anytime you're looking at a fresh opportunity, that's supposed to be a promotion in some ways, your first thing is going to be money. And then your second thing is going to be how it affects your family and the people in your life. And I think for Dan, we had all heard the, just the speculation that his wife wasn't a huge fan of, leaving the New Jersey area where they're currently at, and going west for this. And I also think, again, this point that everyone and their mom is making about how the NBA is an 82 game season and it's a much heavier grind, I think is a good one. It's a fair point. But I can't get away from this idea that Dan Hurley would not have flown to Los Angeles if he was not interested in the Lakers job. And that's the part that's disappointing for me because the Lakers had this guy. The Lakers had a great opportunity here to make a splash, to sort of, change the direction of the organization, sort of change the narrative a little bit. Instead of hiring a guy that's out there right now, James Borrego, right? A decent coach, a solid candidate, someone who can do the job, but not like a transformative, big time landing that's going to ultimately, really help you and push you forward. And that's what I felt like Dan could have been for the Los Angeles Lakers. I felt like Dan had the personality to handle guys like LeBron and Anthony Davis. Felt like he had the X's and O's to go out and beat great defenses in the NBA on a night in, night out basis. And what, again, not to be repetitive on this point, but I was yesterday very shocked that the offer was only top 6. And I know that might sound crazy. Like, hey, this guy's never coached an NBA game, obviously prolific college coach, so why, how is top 6 not enough? Well, top 6 is not enough for the Lakers because the Lakers need Dan Hurley. The Lakers need someone to come in
desperately
and do the damn job. And so the idea that now you rolled up with a top 6 offer instead of like a top 3 offer, basically an offer that's so good that he can't refuse it, is surprising to me. Like, it needed to be a thing where if Dan was going to say no, it was going to be clear that he was just so committed to UConn and his family. We couldn't even blame the Lakers. The offer was so good, who could blame the Lakers? That's the situation that should have taken place here. But that's not what happened. And for that reason alone, I was disappointed in this yesterday.
Yeah, you should have paid him. The number I think that probably would have gotten him would have been $15 million. And I think when you look at that number, that is certainly a nice number for Dan Hurley. You would have probably guaranteed him a $60 million payday. I think he didn't. I agree with you. You don't fly to Los Angeles if you are not going to, if you're not going to seriously consider taking the job. And he has talked about the fact that it was a dream job for him to be an NBA head coach, but you're not going for minimal, and he's making half of what he was offered by the Lakers.
Mm-hmm.
But word is UConn's going to match what the Lakers offered him. So I just, at the end of the day, what were you paying for? You were paying for Dan Hurley to take a huge risk, and the Lakers didn't want to do that. It's the reason that Tyronn Lewis is not the coach of the Lakers, but the Clippers.
Mm-hmm.
It's the reason that they continue to struggle to land big candidates, because they don't want to pay somebody the requisite amount of money that is required to land the biggest fish in the sea. And you're going to wind up with a JJ Redick or a James Borrego, and the harsh reality is that's not good enough.
100%.
You're the LA Lakers. Was Dan Hurley a risk? Certainly. He was a risk. And if he'd have flamed and he'd have been another Laker coach to last 3 seasons, you're the Lakers, you move on. But at least you went as high as you could go in the moment. Because the truth is, and I think a lot of Laker fans don't want to acknowledge this, there's not a backup.
Mm-hmm.
There is only a step back. That's a significant difference. There is not a backup. There is only a step back here for the Lakers. That's this, as shitty as I can put it. And I know that sounds terrible. That's the truth. Is James Borrego a step up from even Darvin Ham? Darvin Ham is right back in Milwaukee as the lead assistant. So was it Darvin Ham or was it the Lakers? I think it's a little bit of both. I think Jeannie Buss, from what I understand, talking to my Laker friends, I think Jeannie Buss has a hierarchy problem. The Rambis family has far too much influence on that organization. I think Jeannie Buss is somebody that likes to sit around, sip expensive coffee, and talk about Laker basketball.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think Rob Pelinka's a really good general manager who doesn't necessarily have the power he needs to run that team. And I think, the elephant in the room is how much impact does LeBron James have there? Now, everybody and their brother involved in that situation is telling you that LeBron's not involved. And I tend to agree with that. But he may not be involved in who and when and how. But if you don't think he's a topic of conversation when they're interviewing Dan Hurley to be their next head coach, if you think that JJ Redick or James Borrego are not having significant discussions about how they will use and utilize LeBron James, I think you're crazy.
Well, and how much power LeBron's got in personnel decisions. I mean, I think you look at, and this doesn't just apply to LeBron, and I think people need to start wrapping their heads around this. Like, the best players in the league have say on personnel on some level. You're not going to go out and sign great players without at least a text or a call to the best player on your roster saying, "Hey, what do you think of this? We have an opportunity at this guy. We think it could be, we think that you could use him this way. How do you feel about that? And just letting those players feel heard. And that's where I think you have to understand the dynamic and the power that players have in the league. And so, like, when the Mavericks went and got Kyrie, they absolutely talked to Luka about that for obvious reasons, right? Kyrie is obviously a high volume player, a high volume shooter, someone who is an on the ball guy. That's obviously going to change how they do business in Dallas on the offensive end. So with LeBron and the Lakers, like, I think it's a natural thing that you would ask LeBron, "Hey, what do you think of Dan?" And that's why I think you've got ESPN and everyone else, showing LeBron tweets about how he was praising Dan during the tournament and, "Hey, love the offense, Dan, and everything's amazing." Like that's why that narrative gets pushed, because if the Lakers were trying to hire someone LeBron wasn't a fan of, you're not getting hired. But I don't think that was the case here, and that's why I tend to agree with you. I don't think LeBron was sitting here saying, "Hey, let's lowball Dan." And that's what I characterize it as. That is a low ball offer. And I don't quite understand it because, again, a coach's salary, it's not like it's attached to your salary cap. It is an outside expense. You got to go and find your guy. So when inevitably Woj goes on ESPN and says, hey, they're trying to hire somebody by the draft at the end of the month. I think it's the 26th, I believe it is.
It is.
When you're trying to hire someone in the next 2 weeks, like the Dan Hurley thing took 4 days, 3 days. Like hiring coaches is not like a 1-day thing. So I feel like by not hiring Dan, you're sort of in this tough spot now where you're a bit behind and you're really going to have to accelerate this process to find somebody. And I don't know, that doesn't really lend itself to a great search is kind of my point. Like you are very much kind of pigeonholed into these sort of, contingency plans, I guess.
Yeah, I also tend to agree that when you look at the coaches who have followed Phil Jackson, Rudy Tomjanovich and Frank Hamlin were not successful, and Phil comes back. Mike Brown, Bernie Bickerstaff, Mike D'Antoni, Byron Scott, Luke Walton, Frank Vogel, and Darvin Ham. Not one of them has succeeded because you can't be a low-level coach or a JJ Redick who's very Luke Walton and succeed in Los Angeles. What so many people forget is Darvin Ham took this team to a Western Conference Finals and it wasn't good enough. And as much as everybody wants to sit around and hate on the Lakers, they took a shot. They didn't throw a hook into the water and hope to get Dan Hurley. They shot a harpoon at that dude. And granted, they missed. But if we're going to sit here and criticize the Lakers, it should not be for pursuing Dan Hurley. Because I think that was a home run until you struck out and didn't get him. That's the biggest issue here. My question is, where do you go from here? Because I'm telling you, James Borrego is not the next head coach of the Lakers. He's the next caretaker of the Lakers. Where do you go from here? JJ Redick is very unlikely to succeed as the next head coach of the Lakers. And you know what the sad and probably tragic truth is? There's not a great candidate out there.
Nope.
Are you telling me if and again, I point to guys in college. It's very rare that a college coach of a Dan Hurley level comes in and wins an NBA championship. It's very, very rare. Isn't Larry Brown the last one to do it? He is. And it's why, you can go across the country and you can look at the Nate Oates at Alabama. I'd hire Nate Oates tomorrow if I were a college looking for a basketball coach.
Mm-hmm. Well, Nate Oates was obviously a leading candidate for UConn when the Dan Hurley stuff started.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking about that. So, that makes sense. But I think that there's not really, many other people out there that would be like a home run hire. And that's why I say, I don't know if Jeannie or Rob or whoever, was like, yeah, we're going to make him an offer that is 2.25 times more than what he's making now on an annual basis. And that seems like a good number. Because that's just not how I would have looked at it. I wouldn't have looked at it as, hey, well, we're doubling your salary. That's I feel like a lot of people feel like that's a great offer. Oh, we're going to double your salary. But you're not. The doubling the salary is not in alignment with how much risk Dan is taking. That's the problem. So it shouldn't be, oh, well, Steve Kerr's making this and Budenholzer's making that or whatever. It shouldn't. That's not how we should be looking at it. We should be looking at it as, hey, there's not another great option out there that would make a lot of sense. Dan's taken a lot of risk from, I don't know, a career perspective, a family perspective. Like you're talking about a lot of change, man. And I agree with you. The UConn job is cushy as hell for him. So you're asking him to do something that's not comfortable in pursuit of what would be his natural progression from a career arc standpoint. And this is somebody who didn't feel like they were done at UConn yet, who felt like, hey, it's time to go out and try to make history and win 3 in a row, which most people think he's going to go ahead and do. So
I also don't know that there's another college guy outside of Nate Oates. Are you hiring Bill Self from Kansas? He's not leaving Kansas. Calvin Sampson at Houston, I think, is arguably the best coach in the country. Uh, is Calvin Sampson leaving Houston now? That probably doesn't seem right. Mark Few's not leaving Gonzaga. There's not another college guy.
Yeah, you're going to have to take a flyer on like a top assistant or something. You're going to have to go and find someone who's in the league now, who has been waiting in the wings for an opportunity. And unfortunately, you're probably going to wind up taking a risk on somebody. And I hate that for the Lakers because, when the Lakers are good, it's better for the league. But I just don't know what else you do here. And that's my struggle. You don't have Phil Jackson sitting out there waiting to come back because, he's still hungry. You don't have, some a name out there that's just like, oh man, like if we could get him for 2 years and then we could, in those 2 years, let him do him and we can go and hunt somebody or try to put something together. Like, you don't have that option anymore.
I don't know. I feel like the other name that's being left out here is Sam Cassell. I mean, the guy just everywhere he goes, they win. And he is somebody that I think, obviously, he's one of the top assistants in Boston right now. That's a really good defensive team. And I think you look at Sam Cassell, he's got to be there. I don't know how JJ Redick already hasn't been offered the job. James Borrego's just not that guy. I mean, no. I understand he's going to be everybody's All-American. He is supposedly, according to Adrian Wojnarowski, in Cleveland right now interviewing for their job. But it just feels like a situation where you don't have a great fallback. You don't have a former player that you feel like can be the Steve Kerr, or mainly because you don't have that roster. You have the truth about the Lakers roster is you're on the older side. Obviously, you're transitioning out of LeBron James in the next 2 years. You're built around Anthony Davis. And I think if we're truth-telling about what Dan Hurley would have been able to do here, I think he would have been able to turn up the defense, and I think he would have been able to use his guards more effectively. That's what the Lakers don't have, is effective guard play. And I think eventually you're going to have to find somebody that had a similar vision to what Dan Hurley does at UConn. Because everybody's trying to copy that now anyways, let's be honest about it. But there's not a guy out there. Kenny Atkinson at Golden State, you could have hired him 3 different times and you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't feel like the right way to go. Hell, I mean, you could probably go back to D'Antoni before you did that.
Yeah, and that's why I say, like, I don't know, man. I feel like if you're LeBron sitting here watching this, like, yeah, you're probably a little disappointed in that. I would have thought, that I guess I just can't get past the fact that the Lakers seemingly did not understand that, hey, if we don't get Dan, there's not much left here. Like, there's not another guy where we're like in love with this dude. Like, we got to get Dan. And that's a mistake. That's a misstep. That's that. Hey, yeah, Jeannie does like to drink nice ass coffee and just feel like she knows what she's talking about type mentality. That's not like, hey, we're going to listen to Rob and Rob's going to tell us, hey, we got to do everything under the sun to go ahead and get Dan, because if we don't, we're in trouble. And that's where I'm telling you, like, the Lakers just have not been that same organization after Phil and obviously after Kobe. You just weren't the same.
I think I'd be chasing the only college coach is Nate Oates. Yeah. That's it. But if I were the Lakers, I'd be on Sam Cassell. That's where I'd be. And I know they've talked about it in LA, but that's the only move, in my opinion, that makes a lot of sense. That would excite fans. He is a really smart. I think he can bring the volatility and the energy that job requires.
Mm-hmm.
Another Dan Hurley trait that I think would have been huge. But I also think we're underselling one lead on Dan Hurley. How important was it for Dan Hurley to remain at UConn? Man, I think this was a pivotal move for college basketball, because I think you need a dynasty. I think you need somebody to say they believe in being a head coach in college. with as damaged as the reputation of the NCAA is now, with NIL, with transfer portal, with all these lawsuits and the money and the BS, and with all of that going on, I think it was critically important for the college game for Dan Hurley to stay. I think they're likely, I mean, I don't even know who else you would favor
Right.
over UConn right now. He has got a roster that's, and I can't believe I'm going to say it, better than his team was this year and certainly 2 years ago. He's deeper now than he's ever been. Like, you would assume that Dan Hurley's going to compete for a third championship here.
Yeah.
I think that's huge for college basketball. I think that is huge for UConn. I think that is huge for their TV partners. Like, I think this was a transformative moment for college basketball, keeping Dan Hurley at UConn.
Absolutely. And I think that the college game has been starved of the iconic coach since Coach K retired. And I think that that's been definitely a factor at play. I mean, if you don't, this is how I like to categorize it. If you don't follow, like, if you're a casual college basketball fan, like, you watch the game sometimes, you show up for UNC Duke, like, you show up for the big matchup, but you're not like ingrained in it. Like, maybe you don't know who Nate Oates is, or maybe you don't know who, Bill Self is somehow, or whatever. Like, you're just that casual observer. The game needs UConn. The game, everybody and their mom knows who Dan Hurley is now. Everybody. And that, I think, is a huge win. And I think for Dan clearly understands the gravity of winning 3 in a row. Like, that's a big deal. Like, we don't really hear about people three-peating or four-peating outside of, like, Oklahoma softball, right? Like, when's the last time you heard someone do that? Because I
never in football.
Yeah, like, never in football. Like, you don't really have it in baseball that I know of. Obviously, we might get it in basketball, but you don't really get that, and that's why it's iconic. And I think what Dan wants to happen is he wants to three-peat, and then he probably wants to evaluate. Okay, cool. But was
Dan Hurley an LA guy? Because I also think this is an interesting discussion. If they'd have paid him $15 million a year for 7 years, would that have been enough money to make Dan Hurley a Los Angeles resident? I think there is some doubt if that would have done it. I think there is a lot of belief. The storylines that are out there that, his wife didn't want to go. His wife has been as supportive and she was when he met with his players yesterday, his wife was there.
Yeah.
His wife was not stopping Dan Hurley from taking this job. There are stories out there that the Lakers made a take it now or never offer. Then why did they let him leave without taking the offer or declining it?
Yeah.
Like, all bullshit. Like, Dan Hurley, at the end of the day, I think two things weighed in most. I think he isn't a Los Angeles guy. The Hurleys are very understated. We knew the Hurleys in Scottsdale through some real estate dealings. They're very understated people. They're not trying to make big splashes in Los Angeles. That never felt comfortable. And I think winning a three-peat, to your point, which is so rare, it's rarefied air. He's already probably a Hall of Famer with this run at UConn.
100%.
But to take it to the next level and win 3 straight.
You're talking about doing things that pretty much nobody else has done. And I think that anytime you have an opportunity to do that, it's hard to just say, whatever. Who cares? Like, he's not going to say that. And I think, you're probably right. Like, Dan's never been splashy guy. Dan's never been like, I said last week that I felt like Dan had the right temperament to coach that team. Like, he had the right energy. He had that aggressiveness. Like, he would have been a fit with this current roster, but would he have been comfortable in the day-to-day? It's hard to say. I mean, LA is like, obviously we all know this, but LA is such a different place than like, you're talking about coming from, somewhere in New Jersey to Los Angeles. Like, you're not coming from New Jersey to Denver. Like, you're coming to a mecca of mass humanity and culture. And while a lot of people love that, Dan is in the earned position of being able to write his own ticket. That's the beautiful thing for Dan and his family. So that's why I say, like, it's not all on the Lakers. There were certainly some things for Dan here that felt like, hey, like, yeah, it's probably better for us if we just stay here and I chase what I built, right? But ultimately, I can't emphasize this enough. When the Lakers lose 10 or 15 in a row this season, and we're talking about, oh, will they make the play in? Will they barely make the playoffs again? When we're talking about that, you remember this day yesterday, and you remember, hey, they didn't make it hard on Dan Hurley. Dan had an easy decision here. 100 million, in my opinion, would have made it very difficult on Dan and his family to say no to this. Like, very difficult. Now, that would have put him at the top of the league, obviously, but the Lakers need this guy.
But also, I think there's one other point that's really important. Don't forget Bob Hurley Sr. He is, I mean, by any measure, one of the most successful basketball coaches in the history of the game. And I think when you are Dan Hurley and you have a chance to do something your old man never did, or to be like, we're talking about rare air. I think there are a lot more dynamics than fuck LeBron and I hate the Lakers.
Yeah.
I think that was way down the list, if it was on the list at all. I think Dan Hurley going back to UConn was critically important for the college game. I think it was critically important for his family, including his father. And I think Dan Hurley just is more comfortable in Connecticut than he is in Storrs, Connecticut, of all places, than he is in Santa Monica, California.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the reality of it.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that, again, like I said, we need to give Dan Hurley a lot of credit, dude. Like, he's earned that right. He's earned the right to choose where he wants to be and what he wants to do. And I give him a lot of credit for that, dude. Like, he's doing something that he's borderline doing something we haven't seen before, assuming they were to win again. So that's why I say it's really
I don't even know where you go here.
That's what I'm saying, dude. Like, don't talk to me about James Borrego or like I actually like JJ Redick, but the reality is he's never coached an NBA team, and there's massive risk in that for the huge risk, dude. If JJ Redick were to make it through his first season, if they were to hire him, that would be a huge win for the organization, honestly. Because JJ Redick, the reality is JJ Redick is not a head coach. JJ Redick is a top assistant. He is somebody who doesn't need to be standing on the sideline coaching the team during the game. He needs to be looking at the tape on the iPad and saying, hey, we need to do X, Y, and Z because this is what they're doing. That is what JJ is good at. That's why his podcast works with LeBron.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's get your comments in here. Thanks to our friends at Prize Picks, prizepicks.com. The cruel, cruel world that Jake lives in, having to see his old man dominate at something that he'll never dominate at, which in this case is Prize Picks. I mean, are you tired of my winnings at this point? Or, are you crying?
I might need a wellness check, dude. It's been a really rough go. We got golf on tap in a couple of days. I might just
the U.S. Open.
Yeah, I might just pass on until the U.S. Open gets here. And then I'm gonna, of course, take Tiger to shoot a 178 at the U.S. Open in his first round. So that's a pretty reliable pick these days.
Yeah, I think Tiger makes the cut at the Open this weekend.
I hope so, dude. Golf needs it so bad.
Yeah, Scotty's dominating. We never got to that yesterday. Is Scotty Scheffler or Dan Hurley the most dominant athlete in the world right now?
I mean, all jokes aside, you can make a case for Dan. Good.
Scotty Scheffler is the most dominant athlete in the world. If you are on Prize Picks, one of the things in golf you can take is birdies or better. Always take more. Always take more. NBA is great. Major League Baseball. I stayed off of Prize Picks yesterday for one singular reason. Does anybody want to guess what that reason was?
Because you're just not good at it?
Suck it. No, because Aaron Judge was off yesterday. I don't even think Aaron Judge got an at bat. He did not. He had a full day off yesterday, which is why I had a full day off from Prize Picks, which is pretty rare. I'm pretty much, a sex machine on Prize Picks.
Right. Yeah.
The only thing I do more than Prize Picks is play golf.
Mm-hmm.
But I would also remind you that as a Cubs fan, I have learned to stay out of the business of prize picking with the Cubs. And yeah, Juan Soto back in the lineup yesterday. Almost picked him, but didn't. So prizepicks.com, use the promo code Monty.
Mm-hmm.
Get 100% deposit matching. When you use the promo code Monty, that means you put in $20. They'll give you 20 more, and you can play for months on $40 on Prize Picks. Prizepicks.com.
Oh, hold on. One more thing on Hurley. I did not see yesterday. Maybe this is my bad. I didn't see the Connecticut governor said, hey, we're going to make sure that Buddy's the top paid college coach. Like, come on, dude. Come
they
on, bro.
already, before he went to Los Angeles, when he let the Connecticut know. So Dan Hurley told UConn, hey, I'm going to go interview for the Laker job. They made him an offer, and I'm guessing they had it ready because it's only been a year since he signed his extension.
Mm-hmm.
They made him an offer to make him the second highest paid coach in college basketball. So that offer's on the table at Connecticut. We'll see. Yesterday, the governor of Connecticut came out and said, we're going to make sure that he is well compensated. But it'll be interesting to see what he winds up doing. And is there going to be like some heavy buyout or like, I'm fascinated by that stuff.